I am Sriqui23, and today I'm going to talk about my game collection. In particular, for this first video, I'm going to be discussing my collection of RPG books. I don't have a huge selection of them, but what I have I'm rather proud of. They're rather hard to come by for cheap. First off, I have Cyberpunk 2020. This is the game that Cyberpunk 2077 is based off of. It's a very cool game. It's very 1980s cyberpunk, sort of William Gibson sort of thing. Very cool. I've also got Deadlands here, and this is essentially a Wild West game, but it also has magic and steampunk elements in it. It kind of takes place in an alternate universe where, during the Civil War, various Native American shamans, they kind of got together in a desperate attempt to stop U.S. expansion. They basically unleashed demons into the West, and essentially you play as sort of cowboys and government agents looking to both survive this new hostile West that's filled with supernatural creatures, as well as stop their spread, because there's a very real danger that if these things get loose, that they could overrun the human race. Also got a variety of Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Like, this is D&D First Edition Basic. For those of you who don't know, there are two... For a while, there were two sets of D&D games. There was D&D Basic, which was the basic rule set, and then there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, more advanced version. This is the classic red box. You may have seen it in shows like Stranger Things. This is very hard to find. I also have the blue box, which is the which basically takes you up to higher levels than the original. Then here I've got the Dungeon Master's Guide for First Edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is the revised cover, because the original cover had a very crudely drawn demon on the cover that was very controversial because of that whole satanic panic thing. And here I've got the Fiend Folio, which is kind of just basically a book full of various monsters and stuff that you can fight in D&D. Then here I've got the later second edition AD&D Player's Handbook. That's cool. For second edition AD&D, I've got a bunch of these campaign books that basically define various settings that you can have your adventures in. Like, this one's for Dragonlance, and what's interesting, though, is that this one's really tiny, and I have seen a full-size version of this, and this one is, like, completely to scale. Like, I guess it's meant to be portable, but Dragonlance is cool. It's kind of a kind of your traditional Western fantasy sort of thing, with a lot of emphasis on dragons, but it has some interesting elements to it, like how all the gods there are organized in terms of being either good, evil, or neutral, and the magic system is actually very cool, because it has the world Kryn, the world that you adventure in, actually has 3 moons, and depending on where they are in relation to one another determines the power of certain types of magic. Very cool. I also have here Planescape. This would have been essentially part of a box set originally, but these things are very hard to find, so I'm lucky that I even managed to find these loose. But what Planescape is, it's essentially adventures in the afterlife, but not just any one afterlife, but basically the afterlives of every religion ever. So, like, you can go to heaven and hell from the Judeo-Christian afterlives, but you can also go to places like Mount Olympus and Asgard, and it's really interesting. Also got this one called Al-Qadim, which is based off of most D&D stuff is based off of sort of European folklore. This is more so Arabian Nights sort of Arabian folklore. Then here I've got the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide for 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. By that point, they had gotten rid of D&D Basic and were just calling AD&D just Dungeons and Dragons, so it's kind of confusing to people who aren't in the know. Um, it wasn't an especially fantastic game, but it did inspire some interesting stuff. I've also got these two things. What they are campaign books, so they have like pre-made adventures in them that have sort of a persistent plot line. Sadly, I'm missing the first book in the series called Dragons of Autumn, I believe. But I should still be able to have some fun with the others. Then I've got these two books for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and in fact, I even have like some character sheets inside of these. I've got the Player's Handbook, but then I've also got Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and this is an interesting. It's kind of an expansion book in that it has like a bunch of new character builds and stuff like that that kind of give you more options in terms of how you play your characters. Then here I've got some more games. I've got GURPS. What GURPS is, it stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. The idea behind it was that it was kind of intended to be an RPG that could be set in any setting. Like the other ones all have unique systems that are tailored for their unique setting, whereas GURPS was meant that you could basically have adventures with anything. I've heard it's very good. I've never actually played it, unfortunately. I've got Legend of the Five Rings, which is an RPG set in the world of Japanese mythology, where you essentially play as members of sort of various samurai clans. It's also very interesting. Unfortunately, I'm missing it apparently requires a unique set of dice that you kind of need to play it. I've got Pathfinder. This is 1st edition Pathfinder. Pathfinder was kind of what when they made Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, they eventually revised it and made version 3.5. And then Pathfinder is essentially what would have happened if they had sort of continued on from there instead of overhauling it with 4th edition. I was never a huge fan of 4th edition, hence why I don't have any of the books, but yeah, Pathfinder's really good. I also have the beginner's box for it. For me, currently, the two RPGs I like the most are Pathfinder and D&D 5th edition. I say that D&D is better for more pick-up-and-play sort of stuff, whereas Pathfinder is better for more complexity. It has a lot more crunch to it, if you will. Next up, I've got the Palladium role-playing game. This is a fantasy RPG that would have competed with D&D back in the day. What's cool about Palladium's games is that they're all sort of compatible with each other. I've got here Rifts. What this is that basically wormholes in space and time sort of start opening up into different universes, and in fact, I even have like this book that's set in one of those worlds, a sort of a horror world. I've also got this one called Mutants in Avalon. This is a book for another one of Palladium's games called After the Bomb, which is about the post-apocalypse. So this is essentially, it takes place in post-apocalyptic Britain, where in post-apocalyptic Britain, King Arthur returns and all kinds of cool stuff happens. I've also got this one for Heir to the Empire. That is for the West End Star Wars games. The idea is that Heir to the Empire was a novel, and essentially it contains all the stuff. So if you want to have a game set during the novel, you can do so. I've also got the core book for Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire the Masquerade is kind of a very Anne Rice vampire sort of thing, where there are vampires who have been living among us and who have accumulated a ton of wealth and power over the years and are trying to remain hidden. I've also got Shadowrun, the beginner's box for 6th edition. Shadowrun is essentially a cyberpunk but with magic, where in the future there's also an event called the Awakening, which basically leads to magic returning to the world. And lastly, I have the Star Trek RPG. From what I've heard, apparently it's not all that great, but it definitely is something I'd like to try sometime. Looks cool. Yeah, I've got the beginner's box for it, as you can see. And yeah, that's it. I hope to make more.